And by the time they reached middle age, they had the resources to live a modest, no-frills life in Boulder, Colorado. And neither Stephen nor Lena had any ambitions to get rich. They just didn't want to work in an office or have a boss. Anyway, around age 45, Stephen started to get back into sprinting, which is something he hadn't done since high school. And after reading the book Born to Run, he was inspired to make his own rubber running sandals. The kind of sandals worn by indigenous tribes in the mountains of Mexico. Soon enough, Stephen's running buddies started asking him to make them shoes. And within a few months, a business was born. Now, along the way, Stephen and Lena encountered every imaginable rite of passage for a business. Manufacturing meltdowns, difficulty managing inventory, the trade war with China, which drove up tariffs on their shoes, debt, anxious investors, even an appearance on Shark Tank, which ended with an insulting offer, which we will get to a little later on. For the first part of this interview, you'll hear from Steve and Lena, will come in participating. Stephen Sashen grew up in the 60s and 70s in Bethesda, Maryland. He was a top gymnast in high school and did track and field, and he also had a pretty solid business performing magic shows at birthday parties. By the time he went to college at Duke, he realized he was pretty good at something else, stand-up comedy.
They had a comedy competition, and they brought 3 comics down from New York, and we did our little competition, and then the 3 comics did their show, and I won the competition, and the 3 comics came up to me and said, "You could be doing this for real." And so,
you could be a stand-up comic.
Yeah, and right around that time, that was when the comedy boom had just started. So this is 1983-84.
Yeah.
And a club opened in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I went down there and auditioned, and they made me the house MC. So I opened for hundreds of acts, and then by the time I graduated, the guy who booked that club said to me, "Call me when you're ready to graduate, because then I'll give you 10 weeks on the road."
Wow.
And that 10 weeks turned into 2 months.
This is why you were a student at Duke. You were MCing this thing.
Yeah. So student by day, MC at night.
Yeah.
Basically December of 84.
Go.
I moved to New York.
Fucking go.
And so you basically moved to New York.
What the fuck?
And a comic.
Jesus.
And that was what you did.
Fuck.
And was that your plan for the time being?
Oh yeah. Once I started doing stand-up, it was just way too much fun. Because, hanging out with these people for a few hours.
Fucking it.
45 minutes. And having a blast, except for when it doesn't go very well, which is very entertaining too.
By the way, when you were performing as a comic, did you ever perform with people who became famous, who really made it big?
One of the reasons that I adore my wife is she puts up with the fact that when we're watching TV on any given evening, I'm going, "Hey, I worked with that guy. Hey, that was my roommate. Hey, we hung out." So I opened for Jay Leno a couple times. I opened for Jerry Seinfeld, Brian Regan. I could literally go down the list. If there's a comic who's been doing it for more than 35 years, we work together.
And what happened? I mean, what happened to your career? Clearly, you had promise, but you're, that didn't happen with you.
Well, oh boy. So the comedy boom started busting in 92-ish.
Yeah. And you were still doing stand-up pretty much weekly or every couple times a week?
Like 6 nights a week. In fact, when I started doing stand-up, for the first couple of years, I worked 7 nights a week, multiple shows per night often. And finally, I kind of burned out. Someone said, "You need to take a break."
But I mean, from what I understand, you weren't really taking a break, because I think around this time you were also attending Columbia in New York and getting a master's degree in screenwriting.
Yeah.
And I guess that sort of gave you an idea for a business, which was like making software for writing screenplays. Is that right?
Right. So I realized that there was an interesting way of thinking about a screenplay in terms of the different elements: the scene heading, the action that you see on the screen, a character's name, what the character says, various things. And if you think about typing on a typewriter, there's cues that your motions are giving you, the tab and enter key, that if the elements were smart and knew what they were and how they related to other elements and how they related to the page, then you could do all the formatting, all the pagination, all this really complex stuff that's very arcane, automatically on the fly in a way that no one had ever done it.
And it was called, and this software that you created was called Scriptware. How did you do it? I mean, how did it come about?
Well, I met a programmer who worked at PC Magazine at a comedy show one night, and we got together and I talked about my idea, and he had just gotten a new piece of software for creating programs that could do what I was talking about. And so we partnered up and started developing this program, which took about 3 years.
Wow. So the two of you built this program called Scriptware,
Yeah.
and you were based out of New York?
Well, once I realized I was going to be in the software business and not the stand-up business, I said, I don't need to still be in New York. And 2 months later, I was in Boulder, Colorado.
So you moved to Boulder, and that's where you based Scriptware. And how did you finance it?
I had about 17 credit cards with 0% balance transfer fees, and that also gave you either frequent flyer points or some other bonus, even for a balance transfer. So for 6 years, I was just shuffling balances from one card to another, racking up frequent flyer points and not paying any interest.
Wow. And so, give me a sense of this. This was, I can't imagine this is a massive market because there's a limited number of people who are screenwriters, but, was this a successful business from a financial standpoint? Was it profitable, or were you barely kind of treading water?
No, we were doing okay. I think at our peak we were not a big business. It was $1 million business, but unfortunately, I discovered something about business that I didn't know, which is when you threaten other people's livelihoods, they don't go, "Congratulations, you have the better mousetrap," and walk away. They will most likely, when backed into a corner, try to screw with you before they try to improve what they're doing. And so after about 10 years, one of my competitors did something definitionally brilliant to kind of lock me out of the market.
Which was to make a better product?
No, talk to the biggest dealer at that time and say, how much margin do we need to give you to not sell Scriptware? And they had an answer. But frankly, in the last 2 or 3 years before my competitor pulled the rug out from underneath me, I was just kind of bored. And so I was kind of looking for the next thing. And I had gotten into internet marketing at that time. This is again 92, 93 is when that all began. And so I was spending more time on doing internet marketing, which was much more interesting to me than running a software company.
What was your objective, Stephen? Were you, from what I understand, you were, Boulder's a great place to live, obviously, but it sounds like you were doing a bunch of different things to build something bigger, to make a bunch of money and retire. What was your strategy?
Yeah, you're giving me way too much credit. So I would say that because I was too old to have gotten Ritalin, I just kept doing things that I found interesting, which had me bouncing around from one thing to another pretty often.
Yeah.
But when I was in high school, I think it was in high school, there was a book that came out called Your Money or Your Life, written by Joe Dominguez and Vicki Robin. The premise being that you want to track your expenses, track your income, reduce your expenses as much as you can, take the difference between what you're making and what you're spending, and invest that at that time in T-bills. And once you're making enough money from your investments to cover your expenses, then you have financial freedom.
You can retire and live off the interest or whatever.
Yeah, and that basically was my goal from the time I was about 16, 17. I used to say to my dad, I'd like to be retired by the time I'm 35.
All right, and so I guess you are, around this time, you're doing a bunch of different things in Boulder, and you're also doing a TV show, right? On a very obscure cable channel called Knowledge TV, and the show I guess was called Disc Doctors, where you were it's like car
Right.
talk for computers.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And while it was, Knowledge TV was from the Jones Entertainment Network, which had a bunch of different channels. A lot of people didn't really know it was on basic cable. Very niche thing, but very entertaining.
This was a show you did with somebody else, co-host, and you would just get calls in. I watched some of it, and most of the calls at the time were like, I've got this virus, and how do I deal with this and that virus?
Well, we will get to this, but if it weren't for that show and I've got this virus, I would not be married to my wife.
Okay, which I get.
I was deciding.
perfect segue into bringing your wife, Lena, into the conversation, who's been sitting here quietly. And Lena, I guess long before you met Stephen, in your 20s, you actually had started and then sold a small business, which was like a mortgage brokerage in Eugene, Oregon. And eventually you end up in Boulder to study dance at Naropa University, which I think is a Tibetan Buddhist affiliated university. And I guess this was like 95, 96?
Right.
And I guess this is when you first met Stephen, and I guess the two of you met in Boulder, like through friends. Like how did the two of you meet?
Yeah, so actually a woman that I had met, I ended up becoming housemates with because she was also a student at Naropa. And she was friends with Stephen, so she had organized a brunch for some mutual friends we had. And Stephen came with his fiance, and that was the first time we met. And I could tell he was interested in me, but his fiance was there, and so that was a do not pass go kind of moment. And his fiance also turned out to be a student at Naropa, and I had 2 classes with her. So they broke up shortly thereafter, but she was spending a lot of time processing the relationship and saying all kinds of horrible things about him. So I really didn't have a very good impression of him.
And I guess at some point, Lena, you start to ask Stephen for computer help because he was the disc doctor.
So I hadn't had television in 10 years, and my roommate and I were living in a mobile home park that required all of the residents to get satellite. And so I was flipping through the channels of the TV with sort of this anthropological fascination, because while I watched a ton of TV as a kid, it had been a really long time. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at the show, and I said, "Alex, is that Stephen?" And she said, "Oh yeah, he's got this show about computers." And a few weeks or months later, I'm not sure, I did get a computer virus, and I didn't know what to do. And I called Stephen, and I felt pretty guilty about it because I was definitely, I knew I had been keeping him at a distance.
Yeah.
And I moved down to New Mexico. I really loved New Mexico, so I moved to Albuquerque, and I was waiting tables and writing. And during that time,